You think you deserve it, Emil? My property? Everything I've built? What have you ever done to earn it? The words hung in the air like a challenge, heavy and pointed, filling the dimly lit study with a tension Emil couldn't quite shake. His stepdad, Victor, sat behind the grand mahogany desk, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Emil with an unsettling intensity. The fire crackling in the corner cast flickering shadows across the room, amplifying the already oppressive atmosphere. Victor had always been an imposing figure, not just physically with his broad shoulders and commanding presence, but emotionally too. He was a man of wealth, power, and conviction, someone who expected loyalty and obedience in exchange for his magnanimity. Emil, on the other hand, had spent much of his life trying to stay out of Victor's shadow. Now, standing before him, Emil felt like a pawn in a game he didn't know how to play. "You're my stepson," Victor continued, leaning back in his chair. "And yet, you act like a stranger in this house. If you want to inherit anything from me, you'll have to prove you're worth it." The implication in his voice was sharp, yet deliberately vague. Emil's chest tightened. This conversation wasn't about legalities or fairness. It was something more personal, something that left a bitter taste in his mouth. Emil had grown up feeling like an outsider in his own family. When his mother remarried Victor after years of struggling as a single parent, Emil thought their lives would finally stabilize. But wealth didn't come without its price. Victor's home, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and opulent furnishings, was a constant reminder of the power imbalance in their relationship. Victor had always been cordial in public, presenting himself as a benevolent father figure to Emil. But behind closed doors, his demeanor shifted. He was demanding, condescending, and occasionally cruel, making it clear that Emil wasn't truly his blood. Emil learned early on to keep his head down and avoid confrontation. But this conversation was different. Victor's tone was laced with something Emil couldn't quite identify. Was it anger, frustration, or something more insidious? Emil couldn't tell. "What do you want from me?" Emil asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Victor smirked, a faint curl of his lips that sent a shiver down Emil's spine. "What I want is simple. Loyalty, commitment, and understanding." Emil frowned, his mind racing to decipher Victor's words. It wasn't unusual for Victor to speak in riddles, leaving Emil to guess his true intentions. But tonight felt different, heavier. Victor stood, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked toward the window. He gazed out at the dark expanse of the estate, his hands clasped behind his back. This house, this land, the business, it could all be yours one day, Emil. But you've done nothing to show me you deserve it. Nothing to show me that you're willing to earn it. The emphasis on earn wasn't lost on Emil. His heart pounded as he considered the implications. What was Victor really asking for? "You've always judged me," Emil said, his voice tinged with frustration. "No matter what I do, it's never enough for you." Victor turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps you're right, but tonight I'm giving you an opportunity to change that. To prove yourself." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Emil's thoughts churned as he tried to piece together Victor's intentions. He felt trapped, cornered by a man who had always held the upper hand. "And if I don't?" Emil asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor's eyes gleamed, a flicker of something dark passing across his face. "Then you get nothing. Not a cent, not a piece of this property. It's all or nothing, Emil. The choice is yours." The words were final, like a door slamming shut. Emil's mind raced with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined, and the path forward was anything but clear. Victor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Think about it, Emil. Everything you've ever wanted could be yours. All you have to do is say yes." The weight of those words settled over Emil like a storm cloud, suffocating and unrelenting. He swallowed hard, his pulse quickening as he met Victor's gaze. There was something almost predatory in his stepdad's eyes, something that made Emil feel both vulnerable and oddly powerful. As Victor turned and walked back to his desk, Emil stood frozen, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear, anger, and something he didn't dare name. What exactly was Victor asking for? The question lingered unanswered. As the fire crackled softly in the background, Emil sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor as Victor's words echoed in his mind. The dim light of the bedside lamp cast long shadows on the walls, matching the turmoil brewing within him. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as he replayed the conversation from earlier. Everything you've ever wanted could be yours. All you have to do is say yes. It wasn't just a proposition that unsettled him. It was the way Victor had said it, as though the power to change Emil's entire life rested in one ambiguous decision. Emil had always known Victor to be manipulative, but this was different. There was a strange intimacy in his tone, something Emil couldn't ignore no matter how much he wanted to. He stood and paced the room, his bare feet pressing into the plush carpet. The house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that amplified his thoughts until they became unbearable. He wanted to call his mother, but what could he say? That her husband, the man she trusted and admired, had made him an offer he couldn't fully understand but felt inescapably drawn to? No, that wasn't an option. As the hours passed, Emil found himself walking toward the study again. He told himself it was to confront Victor, to demand clarity, but deep down he wasn't sure. There was something about Victor's presence, his confidence, his unshakable authority, that both infuriated and fascinated Emil. He hated how easily Victor could pull him into his orbit, how effortlessly he made Emil question himself. When Emil reached the study door, he hesitated. The faint scent of Victor's cologne lingered in the air, sharp and musky, and Emil felt his stomach twist. He wasn't sure if it was anger, fear, or something far more dangerous. Slowly, he turned the knob and stepped inside. Victor was seated at his desk, a glass of amber liquid in hand, as though he'd been expecting Emil all along. He looked up, his expression calm but watchful, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Couldn't sleep?" Victor asked, his voice smooth and steady. Emil ignored the question, standing stiffly in the doorway. "What do you really want from me?" he demanded. Victor set his glass down and leaned back in his chair, studying Emil with a quiet intensity that made his skin prickle. "I already told you. Loyalty, commitment, and understanding." "That's not an answer," Emil shot back, his voice rising despite himself. Victor's lips twitched into a faint smile, but his eyes remained cold. "It's the only answer you're going to get until you decide whether you're ready to earn what I'm offering." Emil stepped closer, his fist clenched. "You keep talking about earning it, but you won't say what that means. Do you want me to beg? To prove I'm some obedient little lapdog? Because I won't do it." Victor stood, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked around the desk until he was only a few feet away. He towered over Emil, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "I don't want a lapdog, Emil," he said quietly. "I want someone who understands the value of what they're being given, someone who knows how to play the game." Emil's heart pounded as Victor's words sank in. This wasn't just about property or money. It was about control, about bending Emil to his will. And yet, there was a part of Emil, buried deep beneath his anger and confusion, that craved the validation Victor dangled before him. "What if I say no?" Emil asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor's gaze didn't waver. "Then you walk away with nothing. But I don't think you will. I think you're smarter than that." The challenge in Victor's tone made Emil's blood boil, but he couldn't deny the truth in his words. He'd spent years feeling invisible in this house, overshadowed by Victor's dominance. This was his chance to finally matter, to take control of his own life. Victor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Think carefully, Emil. Once you make this choice, there's no going back. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Emil's breath caught as Victor's eyes bored into his, unrelenting and unyielding. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into the unknown. I'll think about it, Emil muttered, turning on his heel and walking out of the study before Victor could respond. As he climbed the stairs back to his room, Emil's thoughts churned in a chaotic spiral. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to reject whatever twisted game Victor was playing. But something deeper, something he couldn't quite name, kept pulling him back. When he closed his bedroom door behind him, the silence was deafening. He sat on the edge of his bed, his mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was already too far in to turn back. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, cutting sharp beams across the room where Emil sat in silence. He hadn't slept. His thoughts had been an unrelenting storm of questions and self-recriminations, but no answers had come. Victor's offer loomed over him, a constant presence, its implications growing darker the more he thought about it. He could still hear Victor's voice from the night before, calm and unyielding. Once you make this choice, there's no going back. Emil's chest tightened as he replayed those words. They felt less like a warning and more like a declaration. He needed to confront Victor again, but this time, he wouldn't leave without clarity or closure. Pushing himself off the bed, Emil moved through the quiet halls of the estate. The house, vast and opulent, felt like a gilded cage, each step echoing his rising tension. By the time he reached the study, his breath was shallow and his palms were damp. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open, his eyes locking on Victor, who stood by the window as if waiting for him. Victor turned slowly, his expression unreadable. I knew you'd come back, he said, his voice low and steady. Emil stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You want something from me, he said, his tone sharper than before. But you won't say what it is. If you think you can manipulate me into playing your game, just say it outright. Victor's lips curved into the faintest of smirks. Manipulate you, he repeated. No, Emil. I'm giving you an opportunity, a chance to take what you've always wanted. I'm asking you to prove to me that you're willing to make sacrifices to get it. Emil's jaw tightened. Sacrifices like what? My dignity? My morality? Just say it, Victor. Say what you really mean. Victor moved closer, his footsteps deliberate, until there were only inches between them. His eyes searched Emil's face, and for a moment, Emil thought he saw something raw there, vulnerability, perhaps, or longing. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. What I mean, Victor said, his voice soft but weighted, is that power comes with a price. And if you're not willing to pay it, you'll never have it. Emil stared at him, his pulse pounding in his ears. You're talking in circles again, he said, frustration seeping into his voice. If this is about loyalty, you already have it. If it's about proving myself, I've done that. What more do you want from me? Victor tilted his head, studying Emil like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then, with a deliberate slowness, he said, I want you to trust me. Completely. No hesitation. No questions. Can you do that, Emil? The room felt impossibly small, the air thick with unspoken tension. Emil wanted to lash out, to scream at Victor for putting him in this position, but instead, he found himself asking, and if I do? If I give you what you want, what happens then? Victor's hand reached out, resting lightly on Emil's shoulder. The touch was firm, grounding, yet it sent a shiver through Emil's entire body. Then you'll have everything, Victor said quietly. The property, the business, the life you've always dreamed of. But only if you're willing to trust me. Emil's breath caught. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath him. Every instinct screamed at him to pull away, to reject the offer and walk out of that room for good. But there was another voice, quieter but persistent, whispering that this was his moment, his chance to finally take control of his life, to prove that he was more than just an afterthought in Victor's world. Swallowing hard, Emil nodded. "Fine," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "I'll trust you." Victor's eyes softened, and for the first time, Emil thought he saw a glimmer of approval in them. "Good," Victor said, stepping back. "You've made the right choice." But as Victor turned away, returning to his desk, Emil felt a hollow ache in his chest. He had given Victor what he wanted, but at what cost? The question lingered unanswered. As Victor began speaking about logistics and next steps, his tone casual, as though nothing monumental had just occurred. Emil barely heard him. His mind was already racing, grappling with the consequences of his decision. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. When Victor finally dismissed him, Emil left the study in a daze. The house seemed different now, colder and more foreign, its grandeur tainted by the weight of what had just transpired. As he climbed the stairs to his room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a deal with the devil and lost a part of himself in the process. The door clicked shut behind him, and Emil sank onto the bed, his head in his hands. He had what he wanted, or at least the promise of it. But as the silence of the house enveloped him, one thought refused to leave his mind. Was it worth it?